Welcome back to our final panel. This panel will examine how the Western Balkans can develop a response to CBAM and draw lessons from the UK's proactive approach. The panel will be moderated by Ms. Anne MacGregor. She is regulatory trade advisor at Brussels, and Mr. François-Charles Laprévote, excuse my French, will be joining us via video link. As well, we'll welcome the following panelists: Mr. Bogdan Gecić, founding partner at Gecić Law; Ms. Milena Popović Martinelli. She's a regional policy lead at Central and Southeastern Europe for European Bank for Reconstruction and Development; Mrs. Ljubica, managing director for environmental of HBIS Group; Mrs. Sandra Dokić, special advisor to the Minister of Domestic and Foreign Trade; and Dr. Alan Riley, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Please.
Well, welcome everybody. I hope everybody's had a nice lunch and you're not going to start to drift off to sleep, as is often the case in the first event after lunch at a conference like this. So we've got a very distinguished panel here. Can I also welcome our speaker who's joined remotely from Brussels, François-Charles Laprévote, who is a partner at the law firm Cleary Cottlieb in Brussels. Good to have you with us, even if not for the whole day. We're going to go along the panel in this order, and I'm going to start with Bogdan. And I wanted to just talk to you, Bogdan, about your work in this space over the last several years, where you came up with what you call this four-pillar response, which is really a way of expressing what are the possible policy responses by governments outside the EU to CBAM and what might be the best. And you've been looking at this obviously from the perspective of Serbia and also from the greater Western Balkans region. Just talk about the different policy responses there can be. I mean, we heard earlier that there are 75 countries who've submitted their plans to the European Commission to be vetted, if you like. Take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne. Hi, everyone, again. Well, interestingly enough, I mean, I can't claim authorship. There was a lot of people who were involved and have been working on how to tackle CBAM in the region. There's been a lot of smart ideas. As I mentioned earlier today, we also had the chance to actually follow very closely what the UK has been doing as a powerhouse on a number of levels. When it comes to the CBAM. But of course, this region has a lot of its idiosyncrasies where we're different than anyone else because we're one of the closest neighbors of the EU. We're surrounded by the EU. So you physically, if you try to actually transport anything from the Western Balkans, you need to go through EU territory. There is, I think, no other place like that anywhere in the world. So in that sense, we're quite special. And there was a question of how these jurisdictions in the Western Balkans can actually respond to the CBAM. And one of the first things was, of course, what kind of a carbon system we should have nationally or regionally, how quickly we could implement it, whether it should be a tax or it should be an ETS. We heard the Commission earlier this morning, and I'm sorry that we don't have a chance now for them to respond to this, but there is, of course, a big debate what CBAM is in terms of its legal nature, because unlike the ETS, which is a cap and trade, which means no money go to the EU budget, with the CBAM, that's a very different story. So the big question is then also, you know, if these costs are spilled over or passed over to the industries in the Western Balkans, while the levies go to the EU budget, what should all of these governments do? One of the potential options was to go, and that's what we heard, that there's now from at least the Serbian government reps, that there's a lot of thinking of going with a carbon tax, that there's also a lot of thinking, and we know of industry feedback that there's a need for a green transition fund. So essentially an incentive scheme where the regional governments would either through the levies that they would collect from this tax, then be able to incentivize decarbonization. There's a big need of course, ongoing negotiations with the European Commission, which is a separate pillar, because the Commission, in the case of all of these Civilization Association countries, needs, of course, first to vet whatever levy we have in place, but then they also need to vet whatever incentive scheme we have in place, because all of these countries agreed to a state aid regime under the association agreement that the European Commission then usually reviews. And finally, what we learned initially, thanks to the UK, is, but it's very commonsensical, the second that you have your own carbon levies, you become, your own industry or economy becomes less competitive, which means that you are then susceptible to carbon leakage. In other words, you need your own CBAM. The UK has done a, if I may say so, marvelous job on that one. In some cases, even more impressive than Brussels. For people like me, I'll never stop, complaining how much we're missing the UK in the Union, but that's a different story. Anyways, compared to where the UK is, we haven't seen anything even remotely like that in the Western Balkans. And it's something that once we did pillars 1, 2, 3, this will be a must. And I think one that what we heard from industry, they will expect very quickly. So that's in a nutshell. I just wanted to give the contours, and then I think we can continue on.
We can. Thank you, Bogdan. That sets the scene very nicely. So our next panelist is Sandra Dokić. She is a special advisor to the Serbian Minister for Internal and External Trade. We heard from the minister first thing this morning. And I think, Sandra, with you, we'd just like to flesh out a bit more concretely what you're working on at the moment in government and the time frame. There's going to be a tax from the 1st of January. And then after that, and in parallel, further work going on for an ETS. But you can share more details.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here and to see how many people are still attending the conference. That is a really good sign for all of us. First, I would like to tell you that my previous role was the state secretary and assistant minister in Ministry of Environmental Protection, and because on this conference we do not have somebody from the ministry who can maybe inform us how we stand with the emission trading system in Serbia, because that is something what was already mentioned during some other panelists, why we do not have an ETS system in place, because that is a good way to respond to the CBAM mechanism. And I think it's maybe good to share with you some information about that stage where we are with the ETS system, because when the law climate change was adopted in year 2021, we transposed only provisions from the ETS directive related with the monitoring, reporting, verification, and accreditation system. And I was the one who was leading the process to establish that MRVA system. And I'm really proud with all my team I had at moment in the ministry that we really are successful. Now we have more than 19 operators. They obtain greenhouse gas permits. They submit with their request the monitoring plan that they will monitor the emission from January to December this year, and they will also report the emission. And it's important that we will also have the verifiers who will do that verification job, and the all emission from the GHG emission in Serbia will be covered. So that is really important, because that is the first step in order to establish ETS system. If we want to have the ETS system in place, we have to be aware that we need to change the law, that we need to respond the rest of the provision from the ETS, and that is something what is really time consuming, but that is something what is inevitable. That is something what is the requirements regarding to the chapter 27, and that is something what is going to happen. But in the meantime, because we are aware that we cannot establish the system within the 6 months or maybe 1 year, it's easy to assume that the response of the government would be a carbon tax. But if we want to have the carbon tax in place, if we want to apply it properly, it's important to deduct that from the carbon certificate and to be recognized from the Commission. We really need to see the rest of the implementation act from the Brussels, and that is something what we desperately need, because it's going to be much easier for us to calculate the price and to start to phasing in this carbon tax. In the meantime, we will parallelly work as a government and the Ministry of Environmental Protection establishing ETS system, because that would be the proper response not only on the CBAM but also on within our process of to be a member state, because that is something what is the final we need to do. Also, when we talk about carbon tax, it's necessary to mention what we already heard, that it's necessary to establish decarbonization fund, because it's logical to collect the tax, then to invest in a decarbonization. But what we think it's also necessary to be highlighted is that the industry needs to be prepared for this decarbonization in order to have already prepared a project, because the fund can work only if you apply with a good decarbonization project, then the tax should be used for that. And what is also necessary, yes, we need to protect our internal market, because the CBAM is not the national issue, it's a regional issue also. So we need to have adequate measure how we will react in order to protect our domestic market. So I think it's really important that during the conference we could hear so many information. We have the more or less the same conclusion. It's necessary and it's good that we have the person from the Digitax so they could hear our concern. So that is really important, and I think that they will have a proper answer on everything what is our issue and our concern. So that is from my side now.
Thank you very, very much. So we move along now to our panelist on this panel, who is from industry, Ljubica Drake. She is from the HBIS group, where she's the General Director of Environment, with a long background in the steel industry. So Ljubica, tell us, first of all, what your business does, for those who may not know, as well as what you've been doing to get ready, what your practical experiences are so far, what your learnings and concerns are, and also, because so much of what we're hearing seems to be about money and the cost, you have been working towards decarbonisation, I'm sure. How have you been funding it? And that will then lead us nicely into our next speaker, Milena. But it's a lot to cover, I know, but that's what we'd like.
Thank you very much for opportunity to be here. And I have to say that I'm glad to hear that other industries and other partners share the similar problems, because until today I thought we are the only one facing such a big issues. But obviously a lot of us having the similar issue, and that tells me that we will move forward much faster, because if more of us push, we will go faster. I come from the HBIS, that's the integrated steel mill located in Smederevo, and we have a tin mill located in Šabac. We employ 5,000 people, take or give on a daily basis, because there is fluctuation, and we are the only steel production in Serbia. We are one of the largest exporter, and most of our goods ending in Europe. That's why the CBAM is very critical for us, and we were getting ready as much as we could, even before the CBAM was officially in place. Somebody said on this floor that European Union had 20 years from knowing nothing to acknowledge something. We had much, much less time to do so. We had help from our partners, Serbian Chamber of Commerce, Gecić Law, KPMG, helping us to understand this, the ministry as well. And we did something. We calculated our CO2 emission according to the CBAM, but we don't know, is it good? We don't have verification of it. And in the meanwhile, we got in place the Serbian law that's transporting ETS directive, as Sandra mentioned. We applied for the permit to emit green gas emission, and we got that permit. But still, we don't know, is the method right? That's something that it's very important for us, that we know that we did a good job, that our method and methodology and our tracking of the raw materials and so is good, and that will be good for verificator to justify our numbers. Second thing was also mentioned here, we have to qualify and measure financially how that will cost us, which we can't do it at the moment. I won't repeat what was said many, many times on this floor, because we are having a big pressure from our customers from EU, how much that will affect the price of our materials. And we would like to know that as fast as we can. And we are fully support the idea of carbon tax. We are fully support idea and path to decrease amount of emission, greenhouse gases emission, of course, but that will cost, and we don't want to see that as a cost. We want to see that as advantage and in the market, but we have to work together to see how we're going to proceed that. On what level we're going to proceed at. Steel mill is, as I said, integrated steel mill with 100 years of history behind. And we produce at a similar level. In order to make some big changes, we need to change technology. In 3 years since we start tracking CO2, we did good improvement. Very good improvement, just with the practice, just with the better managing the energy, raw materials. But I think that we hit now, if we are talking about scope 1, the best level that we can with the technology, with the current technology. Now it's a second step. And we can't do that on our own. And that's not because we don't want to do it. We have project, but we have to have financial support. Like that was some mill in the European Union, because, environmentally, it's the problem of all of us. And we have a big support from our colleagues from the steel mill from the Europe. I have to say that. And we talk on a daily basis. We know how that works there. We would like to have the same treatment as the European Union steel mills. And that's our concern. We support the idea of the tax. And what Sandra mentioned, we would like that to be invested in decarbonization projects that we have. And I will finish with one more thing that also concerns us, because we heard from the lady from the European Union that CBAM wants to equalize and put at the same level all productions. I have to say that the CBAM, it's based on the products. CBAMs are looking the CN codes. ETS looks the activities. In our case, and I'm a civil engineer, I'm not a law, maybe I'm not using some legal terms, but I will give the example to you. Our tin mill in Gecić, with a capacity of less than 20 megawatts, is not under the ETS, but it's under the CBAM. Our products that we produce in our tin mill in Gecić, when we export them, are covered by the CBAM. The same industry, the same capacity in the European Union, it's not under the ETS. And also that confirms that, as I mentioned, we did, and we got the permit to emit the greenhouse gases by the Serbian law. Gecić mill, our tin mill, it's not covered because, like you mentioned, our MRV, it's transported ETS. We do not have permit because we don't need to have it. And even if we put the carbon tax, the Gecić mill won't get under that. And that's our concern, taking in mind that we are exporting more than 70% of our products, our tin mill products, to the European Union. That hurts us a lot, because if we want to be equal, then let's see how to do that on the right way. I'm sorry if I take more time. I have much more to talk and moan and say, but for now, it's, I think, enough.
Well, I think that's all really, really useful. So we're going to move now to Milena Popović Martinelli. She is the regional policy lead for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. She's been there since May of 2022. Before that, a background in consulting, where she was trying to help companies become green and advise them on what was coming. So Milena, you work for the EBRD. That is just one bank which can provide support, not only loans. Perhaps you can start to get us into the topic of where financial help can come from. And there are different places it can come from. Your bank is just one.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, it's good to bring financing and kind of dollars and euros into this. Okay, I'm going to start with some good news and some bad news. Well, the good news is that financing for decarbonization is available. So if you want to finance something that is green, that is Paris aligned, as we call it in the environmental circles, that does not hurt the environment, the funds are there. The bad news is that in our region, including Serbia, these investments are still quite costly because they're innovative, they're new. While we have the opportunity to kind of leapfrog a certain development, if that happen, in the EU in terms of technology, that is still very expensive. Another good news is that the donor funding and the grants for the Western Balkans are still available. So that's in a nutshell in terms of financing. There are numerous IFIs, and I'm going to talk from the perspective of EBRD, but I think we all work in the same manner. And what is important to say is that we recognize what Sandra very rightly noticed, that it's about having mature projects to finance. So it takes a lot of time to prepare, especially if it's the first time you're doing something. It took us years to prepare some of the projects that are being basically implemented as we speak, like the air quality project or the renewables auctions, for example. It really took years. And for that, we are providing support, recognizing that that is the critical bit, that you need to, bring the knowledge in, bring the capacities in order to basically be able to scale up the implementation. The financing itself, certainly IFIs, commercial banks, that's the obvious one. What is good about, the companies, I think majority of the industry that was here work with IFIs, and they know that we have very good relationships with donors, and basically we commit to whatever the grants that we are basically provided from the donors, that we give them over to the clients. And there are programs like circular economy programs, various green initiatives with a significantly, concessional financing, so it's cheap financing, but also the grants. Now, talking further, like the funding that is available, I think the Green Fund that was mentioned here, the future establishment, that is something that follows the EU best practice, and it's something that Serbia needs, and we certainly urge for that. And eventually, I think at some point in a few years' time, what we could be looking at are the voluntary carbon markets. So basically financing the transition and the green projects through carbon credits, through the sale of carbon credits. So we are slightly, we are a few years away from that, but that is something that is basically used in the world to finance green projects. Another point that I would like to mention is that it's not all about the projects, and it's not all about financing. Sometimes it's also about the regulatory framework that's going to facilitate certain type of investments. I know a lot of industries were mentioned here today. One that we maybe did not touch upon so much, for example, is the energy sector. And if we look at the electricity in the Western Balkans, all of the Western Balkan countries, they have basically power utilities that are electricity suppliers, and that account for majority of the market. And we know that in Serbia, 67% is dependent on coal. In other countries like Bosnia, more, etc. To green the grid, so to reduce the carbon intensity of the electricity, which is also indirect emission for the CBAM sectors, it would require huge capex, for example, from the side of EPS to invest in green. One of the mechanisms, for example, to overcome that, and that is something that it took us a few years to roll out, is the renewables auctions. Now, what that means is that basically, with the launch of the auction, the private companies, the developers, are willing to invest, to build capacities and assets, and commit to sell 70% of the electricity, the green electricity, to EPS under very competitive prices. So the auctions that were held in February, the closing price for solar PV megawatt hour was 50 to 59 euros per megawatt hour, for wind slightly above 60. But I will tell you, because I know the sector, this is very competitive, right? And I think the industry knows how much they are paying for the megawatt hour. It also releases a small amount. Well, it's up to a developer basically to decide on the amount, but at the moment it's 30%. That's what the developers in Serbia are doing. 30%. It allows for some future corporate PPAs. So basically, for the producers to buy this green electricity. And in order to roll out something like this and to mobilize, for example, private sector and to bring them into the energy and electricity market, it took some years, it took some regulatory changes, but that part also requires a lot of effort, a lot of effort. But yeah, I think with the dialogue between private and public, and with the help of certain institutions that are willing to engage, such as EBRD, but we are not the only one by all means, I think that is something that brings the change and that allows us to scale up the change. So, did I answer the question?
You did. You probably
I
raised
did.
any more in the process, but you've got us off and running.
Thank you.
So we're going to turn now to François-Charles Laprévote, who's joining us from Brussels over there on the screen. François knows all about state aid, and in particular how state aid works in Serbia under the Stabilization and Association Agreement. Because if we're talking about money to industry from governments, then we're in the terrain of state aid. Obviously, there is different channels of financial assistance, and perhaps at this juncture, it's also good to just point out that although we've heard several calls today for some of the CBAM revenues collected in Brussels to be allocated to Serbia and its regional neighbours to be able to finance decarbonisation, the EU is still nevertheless already the largest provider of financial assistance to the region for obviously a range of different projects, and the amount of that assistance is not insignificant. But of course, with decarbonisation, we're really looking at an unparalleled amount of investment that's needed. But perhaps over to you, François-Charles.
Well, thank you very much. And can you hear me well, first of all?
Very well.
Perfect. So thank you for for inviting me to this conference. I really am sorry not to be with you in what I suppose is sunny Belgrade today. It's really a city I've learned to love thanks to my Serbian friends here on the panel. Unfortunately, I'm in Paris, which is a bit more boring. I don't know. But anyway, it's really great to discuss about these topics. To answer your question about availability and maybe rules and precautions and opportunities of state or public funding in the region for decarbonation. Obviously, as you said, and the first thing to remember is that under the stabilization and association agreements, not only for Serbia, but generally for the Western Balkans, the rule is that the states have committed basically to abide by EU state aid rules. There are some specific provisions for instance, for the steel sector, for a number of association agreements, which, as you know, as we've just heard, is a sector that is affected by the CBAM. But the general rule is that as a result of these stabilization agreements, you have to think that if you have something that looks that is qualified as state aid, it will be subject to the review first of the relevant competition authority in the relevant country, for instance in Serbia, and to some extent by a form of review, possibly by the Commission in the context of the dialogue within the SAAs. A quick comment: you mentioned the call this morning by the trade minister for basically sharing part of the CBAM revenues in order to foster decarbonization initiatives in the Western Balkans, among others. Technically, this is something that is not inconceivable. That is actually that the EU has thought about more in the context of least developed countries, frankly, at this stage. But the use of these revenues and the way these revenues are going to be allocated even within the EU budget is still something that is pretty much open. But you have to remember that, and that's the case even for European funds that end up within the member states' hands, to the extent ultimately you have funds that...
Oops, we've lost him. Are we able to get him back?
Hello. You want something with Alan while we're waiting?
Should we start with Ellen? I'm not sure how long it's going to take to get him back.
Depends. You go with Alan. So she was listening.
Right. Alan, you're on sooner than you thought you would be. Would you like to start? You are a British citizen who looked on in great despair at the Brexit vote. You have since joined us in Brussels and you've become an EU citizen in the meantime. You have long and deep experience in all things to do with energy, particularly in this part of the world. And for 8 years, you were a member of the advisory committee in the Ministerial Council of the Energy Community, where you were helping countries in this region come to terms with complying with essentially the EU energy law, which applies very much through that mechanism here. So the EU, the UK, if you like, was in the most advantageous position you could be in for CBAM, because for some of the time, obviously,
This is back on.
Just a sec. Just let me finish this thought, and then we might flip back. The UK was in a good position in the sense that it was still part of the EU when a lot of decarbonisation efforts had already started. Nevertheless, it is now out of the EU, and it has gotten itself ready in perhaps an exemplary way to meet the challenges of CBAM. Having set the scene for you to start, I'm now going to leave you hanging while I go back to François-Charles, who is now back online. Sorry about that technical glitch. Not sure what happened there, but perhaps you want to just pick up where you dropped off.
No problem. What I was just saying is that essentially, even if you have funds that come maybe from European institutions, let's assume that you would go with and would be ready to engage with this idea, to the extent basically they are at some point at the disposal of, let's say, Serbia or another Western Balkan states. Technically, they would be considered as a form of state aid and therefore subject to the rules that I just described. So that's kind of I would say the not so good news, which is that obviously a number of precautions and rules have to be complied with. The good news is that you have under current EU rules and probably under future EU rules a number of possibilities basically to fund decarbonation in a way that is consistent essentially with state aid and competition rules. The basic idea behind all this obviously is that while subsidies, as we all know, can be distortive, they are a source of, including of the current trade tensions a little bit all around the world. At the same time, they might be necessary in particular if you have a number of market failures or externalities. And what I heard even during this panel today obviously confirms that there might be a number of these externalities which might justify subsidies in the first place. So if you look at the EU framework, I won't go too much into the detail, but basically you have both cases where basically state aid for decarbonation or energy efficiency can be basically cleared, does not even require a prior notification. So under the so-called GBER, which is the general block exemption regulation, which basically exempts some aid measures from prior notification, in this case essentially for projects of less than 30 million euros, which is already a pretty significant sum, provided that you meet a number of criteria. You have the possibility basically to get some, in particular, aid schemes, so schemes that are available to all companies that are in the same situation. Some of the basic conditions essentially revolve around, I would say, keeping a dose of competition, even in the process of allocating the aid. So, for instance, a key rule generally in the EU is that the aid must not aim only at basically complying with your currently legal obligations under environmental regulations. It has to go a step further, go beyond the requirements under environmental rules, or provide for obviously an improvement, for instance, a reduction in the greenhouse gas reduction. Generally, the EU, the Commission, encourages, and the rules generally encourage the use of competitive bidding for these kinds of projects, so that basically you maximize, I would say, the bang for the taxpayer's buck, and generally the competitive distortions must be obviously kept to the minimum. So under these rules, you have already a first possibility under the GBER. You also have under current rules, in particular under guidelines on climate, environmental protection, and energy. The possibility also to fund certain measures, and you also have the possibility under the so-called temporary framework, which was adopted for exceptional aid. The temporary framework has a duration that is limited in time. It's supposed to expire at the end of this year, but it also covers some exceptional measures that basically can cover aid to industrial decarbonation. One typically of the elements I was mentioning, the principle of reduction of competition distortions and generally proportionality. One general principle is that one way or another, you typically work based on counterfactual scenarios. So you basically explain what would happen if no aid was provided, whether the project would have been profitable or not, and generally the project would not have been profitable. You infer from that basically a so-called funding gap, and the idea is that obviously the aid must not exceed the funding gap, so exceed what is necessary to basically incentivize the company to go into the project. Now, especially when you are under the climate guidelines or under the TCTF, you have a number of conditions you have to notify to the Commission, and you have reviews that can be pretty lengthy and pretty burdensome. The Commission is aware of that, and this is why it has launched, and it's part of the Draghi report. It's part of the attempt by the Commission to be including in its management of state aid review more enterprise friendly. You have now a proposal on a so-called clean industrial state aid framework, which is currently under consultation, which should be adopted by the end of this year, and which generally should provide for additional simplifications and allow member states to set up schemes that are as efficient and that can be deployed as fast as possible to support decarbonation. So this obviously is a development that I would suggest the Western Balkans follow closely, because obviously it can be a very good blueprint, especially if this clean industrial framework gives rise to an efficient mechanism for providing funding. It could be a very good blueprint to take inspiration from, while basically having a certain guarantee that whatever is done is in line with EU rules.
Thank you very much, François-Charles. So now back to Dr. Riley to tell us more about what the UK has been doing, and also to perhaps draw some distinctions between the UK's position and how that's all been possible, and the differences in the situation that's faced here and what might be possible here.
So, I mean, to be fair to the European Union, to the European Commission, obviously, if you're a single state who's got a lot of experience of dealing with climate change issues, you can more rapidly design a system yourself. And I think I think the first point with all of this is that the UK could look at it, because you don't have to do the negotiations with 27 member states, which is, one could argue, a blessing to some degree, and that sort of helps. The other issue is, of course, by design, the union ends up in a situation that, as this would involve effectively a form of revenue raising, the member states are not going to let the central organs of the union run it. So if you want your CBAM certificates, you go and buy them at each and individual member state, which creates a degree of fragmentation, which is one of the things that Draghi actually points out in his report is potentially a problem, and I'll come back to that. So so some of the advantages the UK gets I think, don't flow necessarily from its own natural brilliance, but from the fact that it is a state which knows about it, doesn't have to talk to anybody else, and can just deliver. And I think one of the examples of that is in relation to the fact it doesn't have all the hang-ups about the central organs of the British state raising taxes. That's always a very good idea as far as they're concerned. And so having a simple tax-based levy, very clear, you don't have all the palaver of basically obtaining CBAM certificates and then cancelling them. You have a levy. It's run by the tax authorities, has a number of advantages in terms of potential smoothness of operation, ability to pull in all of the sort of fraud measures which exist in the tax system and so forth. So that actually is, you can see how that is great, but I don't think it flows necessarily from something which is more distinctive about a single state being able to do this where the state knows what it's doing. That you can see that. And the EU is in a different position, given you've got 27 member states which you have to negotiate. That's all true. And the sensitivity about tax in the EU, and the EU have any control of the tax revenue. All those things, I think, are true. What I think is different, though, is, and where you can see British pragmatism has actually played a part, is if you look at the initial thresholds. So the initial thresholds the Brits set up was it'd be £50,000 of goods in any 12-month period. And this effectively took out 80% of the companies who would be affected, but can effectively let court 99% of the emissions. And the current EU threshold is €150. Well, not 150,000, not 15,000, not 1,500, but 150. This is a particularly, this is unnecessary. Now, it's true, of course, they're planning, I think, a 50,000 ton threshold, which will have the effect of taking out sort of equivalent levels to the British one. But this is only as a result of what's known, I think, rather inelegantly as the Omnibus Directive, which is going to result in going back only very, very close to the point at which it's going to come into force to change all of this. This is something which was unnecessary, and I think shows a degree of speed, potential speed of action, and focus and pragmatism on the British side, which was not, I think, really there on the European side. And I think so one of the questions that I think is worth thinking about in design is whether or not, either at national level or regional level within the Western Balkans, looking at the UK model, because essentially you are more like the UK than the EU, at least individually. And because there's relatively few of you, it was potentially, at least in theory, possible to do some sort of deal, which and you could draw upon the UK model. For example, the attractiveness of operating it via the tax system and doing certificates, I could see that could work. The other issue is also about, and this is one of the problems the union has got, and also perhaps less of an issue in the Western Balkans, but you've got the issue of the integrity of the system. It's not just fragmentation and differences in approach to the operation of CBAM certificates. Let me explain it by creating a non-existent member state as a way of explaining this. Let us suppose we had a state, let us call it Vangari. Now, Vangari has decided to have its CBAM certificates, which you can acquire and you can cancel via them. And Vangari has a relationship with a country, a very large country to the east, which produces vast amounts of goods, which are carbon impregnated, and potentially could enter the Union. And so the difficulty I'm getting at is, if you have this sort of fragmented system with states like our non-existent state, Vangari, you can see the danger that how are you going to sustain the operation of the practical execution of the CBAM system and the CBAM frontier, where states are differentially applying those certificates, and we have states who have relationships with third states with significant carbon industrial operations, for which they have tremendous incentives to find some way around the carbon barriers. You could begin to see this could be very, very, very difficult. And then there is the other issue, practical in this, is how are you going to be sure? How do you go through the verification process? If you take, first of all, the actual, if you say we're not going to use the default values, the benchmarking processes, we've got our actual values, how are we going to be sure that they're correct? And how can you ensure that the independent verifiers are independent? How, even if they're independent, can they be sure they've actually got the real data? How does that work? And then what about the emission trading schemes? Supposing there are states who've got emission trading schemes but have huge amounts of coal production within their states, but they claim, yes, we've produced hundreds of gigawatts of renewables capacity. So let's look at that and not look at our massive increase, our 245 new coal-fired power stations over the last 10 years, for example. You begin to see it becomes very, very, very difficult. And it's interesting. I know, going back to the Draghi report, Draghi talks about the complexity of the system as concerns the fragmentation and international cooperation, because all of this relies upon effectively a cooperation between states to be willing to furnish the documentation to support actual use or actual emissions and actual operation of emission trading schemes. And if that isn't there, you've got to ask, how have you got a problem? So my other kind of more fundamental thought about this was this a sort of plan which was conceived before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, before the pandemic, when the world was a nicer and more reasonable place? And is it going to be much, much more difficult to deliver today? And that is a problem both for the UK and for the European Union.
And for the Western Balkans.
And indeed, listen, you took my punchline away. And indeed, for the Western Balkans. Right.
So I think you've made us feel rather gloomy.
Well, So more positively, can I be positive?
You can be positive.
Okay, I can be positive. So notwithstanding that, notwithstanding all of that, what I would say was because what I think actually then happens, where I think you end up is within Europe, and I don't mean the European Union, I mean kind of broader Europe, who are all one way or another impacted by the EU single market. You end up with an offer which gives you a degree of carbon. We end up with a carbon regime which works within Europe, but we have a significant carbon wall outside, because we can't quite. We will allow companies through the non-European state companies through that wall, who we are pretty sure are complying with the rules, but otherwise they're not. But that basically then puts the Western Balkans within the Union's carbon wall. And that is where we're going to end up. And I think this is a fact of geography. And to make a British comparison here, is that Brexit or no Brexit, you can't ignore the geography. And the geography is where we are. Right.
Wise words indeed. Turning it back to you, Bogdan, I'm sure you have something to say on what you've heard.
Thank you very much. So this was fantastic. Thank you, Alan. I mean, I actually, so a couple of things. Okay. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Draghi report, and generally the whole punchline of do something. I mean, that's I'm sorry that the commission isn't with us anymore in that one, but definitely that's one of my takeaways from what you just said. Another one is that if I understand you right, it almost sounds that for the CBAM in this specific point in time and place, it would make more sense to be an individual nation state and part of the union. And if you're one of the Western Balkan countries, it's actually great to have the UK there as a partner that we can learn and work with. I mean, I'm sorry that our good ambassador Ferguson is not here, the UK ambassador to Serbia, but essentially it sounded almost as a pitch to relaunch the partnership between the UK and the Western Balkans. I mean, that's how much this. But essentially my question is, because we've been very keen on looking what the UK did with the CBAM, because for us it was a more streamlined and sensible and workable mechanism than what Brussels came up with, due to all of the reasons that you mentioned. But essentially what I wanted to ask you, knowing the 6 jurisdictions that we have in the Western Balkans, I mean, what do you believe essentially? Is there any other model? Okay, the UK has the ETS because it's been in the ETS for a very long time. But other than that, if we would go, for example, back to the pillars with a carbon tax, well, we heard that the ministry and the government in Serbia is at least considering the other steps. Essentially, the UK model, is that something that would be sensible for the region?
Well, I think my own view about that is that in terms of the steps before you get to CBAM, in terms of the system, I will be quite careful about taking up something which, I mean, I think you can learn from that. I'm not necessarily sure I would go for that. I mean, maybe some form of carbon tax might just be just a lot easier to do, because I see the level of the British system now works because it's been there a very, very long time, and through trial and error, the ETS kind of system kind of sort of works, and people know what they're doing. But it took a hell of a long time, and there was loads of there were one points when the whole thing was so absurdly cheap, and the government was begging people to try and sort of sort it out. It was a bit of a disaster. So that's why I'm thinking a carbon tax might be easier to go for than go straight for an ETS, unless, and I'm worth talking with some of the ETS design people in London as to what they did. Is there a shortcut ETS design you could use, which nobody's used but might work? I don't know. I mean, I'm not super expert on the design of the UK ETS, but it'd be worth at least looking at those issues. I think simply copy and pasting thing is never a good idea. I have the great example, the story about the Ukrainians adopting the British Financial Services Act this is like in the early 1990s, in total into Ukrainian law, word for word, including the clause which said this act does not apply to Northern Ireland. Into the yeah, so that is not where you want to go. Copy and pasting, bad idea. So, aside from the fact, of course, it was the City of London, and no country on earth, perhaps save the state of New York, needs anything as that complicated.
So I'm sure we have some reactions here from some other panelists. Milena, did you? Yeah.
If I may, I fully agree. Copy and paste is really not a wise option. Just a small reflection on ETS. I think it was previously said quite clearly, but I feel an urge to repeat it. The fact is that for ETS to work, you need to have a certain volume of transactions and volume of participants, that there is a big question mark if we can do that here in the Balkans. Is it really going to work? So, and it may work, I don't know, but certainly the point is to start with the carbon pricing And that would be the recommendation to learn, to understand the impacts, to understand how the economy and the private sector is dealing with it. Because at the moment, I mean, we don't have much transparency or not enough transparency from the Commission. We are missing a lot of implementing acts. I mean, my personal question is when I read the omnibus was like, okay, there is a relief for the importers and it's 50 tons of goods. But if I'm an exporter, how do I know if my mid-cap partner is above or below? I mean, they can always claim that they're above and use that to, pressure me. So really, we need more information from the side of the Commission that would inform the governments to act. But the point is, the sooner, I mean, the economy and the private sector, we like predictability, we like visibility, we need time to prepare, to react to the changes. So yes, do something, but first Brussels, but also countries in the region. So that would be my reflections.
Sandra, did you want to perhaps react there?
Yes, thank you very much. This was really... All right. This was really valuable to hear all this and to get all this information. And I think that maybe we should be aware that the last 5 and more year, Brussels and Commission was really ambitious. Started with the European Green Deal, then the Green Agenda for the Western Balkans, then the CBAM, and then Industrial Clean Deal. It is so many regulations and so many goals we need to achieve in order to be aligned with everything what is related with the environment. And also we have to be we have to know that for Serbia and I think also for the Western Balkan economies, we will have huge investments in order to improve environment. We are talking about billions of euros. I think the main investments would be from the public sector, not only from the private sector. So when we hear that this CBAM measure is only it will hit only goods, not state, I cannot agree with it, because the lot of companies they expect in order to deal with these additional costs related with the CBAM, they will have expectation to get some subsidies from the state. What is normal to have this kind of expectation, but we have to be aware that the state also will have their investments in environment, and in order to achieve everything what we want, it's necessary to start talk with the Brussels to unlock the funds we already have in the EU countries, because that would be the best possible way to accelerate all our investments in public and private and be aligned with the EU. That is something what is our expectation also, and I think it's really important to share with the public that now our Ministry of Finance has a really important role in this CBAM response. We are working on this analysis, and I think it's going to be a really busy summer for not only for the government but also for our consultant, and we will take into consideration everything also what we heard here on this conference, especially with the steel industry. We know that electricity is really complex and demanding, and that's why I think that in a few months from now we will have some proposal. It is going to be transparent, and the industry can easily see how we will respond on this mechanism. So that is my crucial message, and I think it's important to repeat again that industry also should be prepared with a good decarbonization project. Yes, that is something what we will need. That is
so
from my
perhaps
side.
that sets the scene to pass the mic back to our industry panelists, Ljubica.
I will go back to the beginning and those 4 pillars response strategy. It's a great strategy, but we had to do that yesterday. We are far behind. And that's why we have to do very fast. And please, don't just copy and paste something that somebody else did. Please look the state of the industry. Please look the social effects of all it, because maybe it's not applicable in Wales if you live in Ukraine, but even if you take something, you should look the broader picture. If the EU is asking for something, just don't take it for granted. We want to work, we want to produce, we want to keep our economy up, and we have to deal that together. We have a good database, we want to cooperate. When we are talking about decarbonization, that's not to improve yourself, it's to change your technology. That cannot be done over the night. We are doing small things, but that won't give us the benefits that we are obliged to do. We have to change technology. And okay, let's do it. We all tomorrow, the steel mill will become electric arc furnaces, for example. We will all get money and change it where we will get the raw materials, where we will get the scrap. It's a broader picture. That has to be a strategy. That's why I'm going back to the beginning. Strategy is a key point. If I may ask something, just to change the order of your steps, to do the domestic carbon pricing, transition subsidies, then negotiation, and then the regional carbon leakage. Also, I didn't touch the basis because people before me asked that. We are also afraid for our market, because our market is now vulnerable to get the steel that won't place the goods in the European Union. They will come to our market and can push us even from that small bit. Like I said, we are exporting 70% more, but still we are having in Balkan our market as well, and we have to deal together.
Thank you for that. Perhaps quickly back to François-Charles before we turn to the audience.
Yeah, sure. Very, very, very quickly, a few reactions. First of all, to Bogdan's point about is there a country that is surrounded by the EU? Another one, I know one. It's Switzerland, and maybe it's the goal. I don't know for the region. But I completely adhere to what has been said about being wary of pure copy and paste. The UK example indeed is an interesting one. The situation obviously of the Western Balkans is different, both if you look obviously at the industrial base and at the economy generally, and also at the perspective, which is obviously the perspective of adhesion, of accession to the EU. The other thing I wanted to react to is what was said, I think, by Sandra, Dokić, but also by others, which is, the investment needs probably for decarbonation, in particular in the Western Balkans, are going to be huge. That's what I was mentioning earlier. If you think about state aid or subsidies can be justified when you have a market failure, and here there is a case to be made to say that the private sector on its own might not be able to do it all. That being said, and you can see it again with what Brussels is trying to do. There is also a case for trying to crowd in as much as possible private participation whenever that is possible. And so I think that the challenge, and this goes beyond, I think, environmental policies or being good, as I think someone said. We are talking about an industrial policy basically challenge, which is how to have a smart industrial policy, how to select basically the sectors and the players on which you are going to, or for instance, the public authorities are going to be willing and to feel that it is necessary to put basically the impetus to get them to decarbonize and to be successful in the future.
So thank you for that. We have about 9 minutes left. So time to open the floor. Would somebody like to kick us off with a question or a comment? We have a roving mic looking for hands to go up. come on, surely someone has something to say. Ah, there's a hand. Till.
After Bogdan was concerned that I was too silent this morning, I will now try to correct the record. No, but it's more an observation, and that is that there are several elements that I think the Western Balkans urgently need to address. The first one being its industry is now faced with a CBAM situation. CBAM is there, but it is a moving target. So I think the need for local industry here to understand what's going on, to adjust to that, is very clear. Second, the governments need to react. CBAM pricing, if nothing happens, the money ends up in Brussels, essentially. So the question is, how can you best ensure that the funds that have to be coughed up somehow, initially remain in the region? Given what I heard, it seems that the best short-term solution is indeed a levy, a tax, because it's easy to administer, it's easy to implement, and it's easy to construct in a way that it is predictable. Whether in the longer run, in preparation for joining the union at some point, you would want to experiment with an ETS system that mirrors more closely what the union is doing, so that the local industry gets used to that, is another question, maybe not one that needs to be answered today. So with these three thoughts, I leave the floor to the panelists again. Thank you.
I think that was really a very good summary of all the different things we've heard today. We have about 6 minutes left. Perhaps one key takeaway message that each of you would like to impart. Let's go along the row. Bogdan?
Well, first of all, thank you, everyone. I mean, it's been a great day, and it was lovely having you all with us. But I'll go back to what Alan was saying, because he was so, at least in my brain, so vocal about, what the UK did and how much it would be good for us to, as a region, to work more with the UK. So I'll use the floor to publicly ask you to be our champion in this relationship with the UK. But kidding aside, I think one of the big takeaways is that of the countries that the region can actually look up to, not cut and paste. That would be a big mistake. And I think at least this region learned its lesson when it comes to cut and pasting stuff from Brussels. That instead that someone with whom we could team up, and where at least in this specific issue we have a very common interest. That it's after a long time, I think it's very clear, especially after everything you said, that there is such a thing between the UK and the Western Balkans. So that's my big takeaway from the panel.
Sandra?
Okay, my message is really clear. Maybe we need to speed up a bit more as a government, but don't worry, we will finish everything on time. So we will have the proper response, and I don't think that industry should be in let's say in a worry about everything, because we for now we know what we are doing, and we are aware of each particular industry, and we will take everything into account before we apply some appropriate measure, and probably it would be the carbon tax.
Ljubica?
My message will be that, like this panel, everything that's it's coming ahead of us should be as a partnership done together between all stakeholders. Because yes, we have to do fast. Yes, we have to act very fast, but without hearing each other, we won't do the good job. That's the only thing. And HBIS is here for all information that you need. We are open to cooperate in any level, and all stakeholders are more than welcome to ask us whatever they need in order to get the best platform for what is ahead of us.
Thank you.
I think my message is that we need to certainly talk to each other more. But also one point to consider that whatever one of the countries in the region, whatever one country does, it affects the whole region. So I think we also regionally need to talk more, because there is a lot of trade within this region. So I think the graph that Till used in the morning was misunderstood. What he presented is that 80% of the CBAM exports are going to the EU, but the remaining 20% are going to the region. So as in Western Balkan region. So I think we also need to talk to our neighbors as well. So that's something to consider.
Definitely. And last but not least,
Oh.
Dr. Riley.
Right. So my last observation is this: that the problem with both all the CBAMs, whether it's the EU one or the UK one, is nobody's ever really tried to do this on this scale before. And when we do it, there are going to be problems, and it's going to require governments on all sides and the EU to amend as we go forward. I mean, the essential principle in implementing CBAM, both in the EU and the UK, must be the same principle, which is no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. Now, as it goes into effect, we will find all sorts of problems, and we will have to amend and adapt as we arrive at the legislative moment where we hit reality. And I think that is surely clear, because we've never done this before.
That's right. So it's learning by doing. And I had almost forgotten, but not quite, François-Charles, who's still on the line from Brussels. You get the final word.
No, thank you. I think my link is time limited, so I'm gonna be very, very quick. I would say number one, speed is of the essence. That's what I hear, and number two, there's quite a lot of work ahead for the region, but there are also opportunities and possibly even opportunities coming from Brussels. You must never despair.
Thank you very much. With that, it only remains for me to thank everybody on the panel, thank everybody in the audience, and that brings us to the end of our formal session.